Now what I usually do is let the whetstone soak in here for about 5 minutes, and you can see bubbles will come up. Now I've already gone ahead and soaked it before, which is why the bubbles aren't coming up, but you want to soak it for 5 minutes until all the air bubbles are out of the stone. And once you're ready, you want to have a nice cloth on here, which is going to give you a grip. I'm going to take this guy, which is, just want to get it in here so it's nice and compact. So I'm going to start off with the small little knife here. This is my paring knife, and I always start with the low grit side first, and on the side here you can see the 1000 and 4000, so the low grit side is on top, nice and solid here. And I'm just going to put 3 fingers on the blade, one hand grabbing the handle, and you want to get nice even strokes from the base of the stone all the way to the top. Maintaining that even pressure, keeping an even speed, just smooth back and forth. Angling just towards the end a little bit there so you can get the entire blade to press against the stone. And one thing that's really important here is the angle at which you're pressing through. So you can see this is at about a 30 to 40 degree angle. You don't want to be too 90 and you don't want to be too to the side. So it's kind of that 30 to 40 right in the middle here, closer towards a flatter side. And my fingers are on the blade just to make sure that I'm keeping the pressure on the blade even. And it also means that I'm able to press down the blade as opposed to letting it kind of lift up on me as I press it through. So you're pressing the blade down with an even pressure and pressing it through. After a few times, you start to see this build up. You want to keep the stone fairly, just not crazy wet, but you want to have enough water on there that that grit doesn't start to damage the knife. So when you start to see a bit of that build up on here, you just wipe the knife down. I'm going to switch to the other side now as well. And I've done this a few times, so I find it easy to switch hands, but some people might find that awkward. You can come this way. I just always prefer when I'm dealing with a knife to have the blade moving away from me. So I recommend practicing with your non-dominant hand as well, so that you're able to get that same movement, that same pressure with your fingers, but you're using your other hand. And I also wanted to just show you kind of the technique for a knife with a slightly larger blade, because the last one was a paring knife, so much smaller blade. So this is a knife that I use most often. This is my chef knife. So because the blade's a lot bigger in this one, you're not really able to get your 3 fingers, you know, kind of spread across. I mean, if you play the guitar really well, you can probably do that. But the method that I like to use in this is I kind of like let my fingers sort of dance on the blade. So again, I start off at the base, start off at the, you know, at the base of the stone as well as the base of the blade. And then as I go, kind of let my fingers move from the base all the way to the top. So what I'm pretty much doing here is just letting my fingers go up on here, but at the same time as they're moving on here, what it does is it maintains an equal amount of pressure. Again, you want to be careful to keep your fingers away from the tip of the blade, the edge of the blade. Switch sides. Again, I use a slightly different technique with my left hand, but essentially the same idea. and I actually do play the guitar, and my left fingers are a little bit more spreadable. So you can see I have a slightly different technique on this side because I just have different ability with my fingers here. I'm gonna go ahead and test the knife. So I'm gonna test the blade here. One thing to keep in mind is when you're testing your blade, to never go in the same direction as the blade. This is how you cut your hand. But if you want to test the sharpness of the blade, you can use your thumb, the nice meaty part of your thumb, and just pull slightly. Oh yeah, I can definitely see this knife is getting a lot sharper. Now there's sections in this knife that I can see need a little bit more work, and that's gonna change depending on what your knife feels like. So for me, this part feels a little dull, and then as I run my finger through, it gets sharp, 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 sharp. So this part stays nice and sharp for me. This part feels a little dull. So I'm gonna pay a little bit more attention here. But before I do that, what I'll do is flip this over to the other side. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch the grit. I'm getting in on the finer grit side again to make sure your whetstone is wet. And here we go. So first few strokes I'll do for the entire blade, and then I'll start to zero in on the section that I know needs a little bit more work. And I know some videos, they kind of test cutting paper, and you certainly can cut paper to test the sharpness of your knife. But for me, more than paper, I like to test tomatoes, because tomatoes are really the ones when I cut them, I can tell, okay, this knife is now no longer as sharp as I like it to be. So for me, I prefer testing with tomatoes, but you know, if you want to cut paper, make a cool little YouTube video about that, totally fine to do that as well. So again, you see I just switch sides, getting the other side as well, so that I'm making sure that the fine grit has contact with the entire blade. All right, so now I'm just gonna focus a little bit more on this section here. So now I'm gonna go more straight. And again, the reason why you want to utilize as much of the whetstone as possible is so that you're not creating a bit of a divot in the center. You keep it nice and even all the way through. Because over time, if you just use this portion of the whetstone, then you will start to have kind of a divot through that part, and you want to prevent that from happening. So again, keep your strokes nice and even, utilize the entire stone, sides. This can be quite a nice meditative practice as well. If you're into ASMR, this has some of those components. It's a very calming, at least I find it calming. It also incorporates the Kaizen philosophy in that you're making sure that your tools are sharp, that you're making sure that you yourself as a person are performing at your peak levels. And in order to perform at peak levels, your tools have to be in prime condition. So I'm gonna just give this a little wipe here. I think I've done enough work on this knife. All right, so I think that's pretty good for this knife. I'm not sure I'm gonna get too much more mileage out of this. Just a little bit more. sides.